Thank you, Keith. I was half hoping that maybe Keith would, in addition to that introduction, maybe let me hold one of his gold gloves. He's got 11 of them. He uses them as door stoppers. He's got them as bookends. I think he even set one up for his cat Haji to use as a scratching post. Of course, Haji's fairly famous in his own right. I want to thank the New York State Baseball Hall of Fame for this incredible honor, and I'd like to congratulate all my fellow inductees. Just to be included on the same list as Mickey Mantle makes me feel a tad inadequate. The first Major League Baseball game I ever attended was the first Mickey Mantle Day at Old Yankee Stadium, September of 1965. My cousin Judy took me. I was 7 years old. We sat in general admission seats way up in the upper deck in left field. And I remember 65 was not a good year for the Yankees. They ended up sixth, the worst finish in 40 years. But on this day, the place was jammed, an enormous crowd to honor the Mick. And I don't remember a lot about the game, but what sticks in my mind was that Mickey played left field that day. And each inning, as he hobbled out to his position below us, the huge crowd would buzz and cheer for this player who in so many ways had transcended the game. He'd become a cultural icon far beyond baseball, and even though his skills had faded and his career would be over in just a few years, the people who had come to see him would always think of him as they remembered him, as the epitome of youth and speed and power and grace. And as a little kid, it gave me my first sense of the abiding history of baseball, the timeless permanence of this wonderful game in people's consciousness, the sense that the people and the moments, though they might be transient, can somehow last forever. And that's why events like these and organizations like the New York State Baseball Hall of Fame are so immensely important in preserving the people and the moments that are the fabric of our memories and form the backstory of where the game is today. So thank you so much for including me in this celebration. I had two ambitions growing up. One was to be a 6'9" power forward for the Knicks. The other was to be a shortstop for the Mets, like my hero Bud Harrelson. My backup plan was to be a major league pitcher, but that dream, like the others, effectively ended when I was 14, when a big dude named Arthur Taney took me deep for what might be the longest home run in the history of the Hillcrest Senior League. Big Arthur, with one swing, forced me to alter my life plan. I always enjoyed listening to baseball on the radio, even though I was too young to really understand what was going on. There was something about the rhythm of a baseball broadcast, that rocking chair feeling of sitting back and listening to an announcer tell a story backed by the buzz of the crowd, and then leaning forward as the pitch is thrown, waiting to hear what might happen. And then the occasional spasm of action, the ball in the gap, the outfielders converging, base runners in motion, and the heated words coming through the speaker, making sense of this blur in seconds as the sound of the crowd rises behind the words. For me, it was mesmerizing. And when I was 9 years old, I received the most important gift of my childhood, my very own AM radio. This was a big wooden block that sat on the desk in my bedroom. You turned it on, and it took about 20 seconds for the tubes to warm up. And then that radio could take you anywhere. It took me to music, it took me to other sports, but most importantly, it took me to baseball, and especially to the Mets. Bob Murphy, Lindsey Nelson, Ralph Kiner, brought to you by Rheingold Beer, the beer with a 10-minute head. I still don't understand that advertising slogan. I lived for these voices I heard describing the action, allowing me to see the game in my mind, teaching me about both the games they chronicled and this singular craft of bringing an event to life in all its majesty and complexity solely through their words. And never in a million years did I conceive it might be possible to join their ranks. I don't remember my first game at Shea Stadium. It was probably somewhere in 1966 with some friends and one of their dads, but I distinctly remember the feeling of riding those incredible escalators to the upper deck and then walking through the tunnel, through the concourse to the stands, and immediately being struck by all that green grass and that open outfield at Shea that allowed you to see forever, or at least to the big Serval Zippers sign that would flash on and off in the distance. I probably spent 500 days and nights in that upper deck at Shea. I was there for the pennant clincher against the Braves in '69, making my way down to the field for my little piece of turf after Nolan Ryan got the final out. I was there for the incredible stretch drive in '73 for Bud Harrelson and Pete Rose wrestling in the infield, for Rusty Staub slamming into the right field fence, and then starring in the World Series with one good arm. I was there to watch Tom Seaver dominate, and then I was there for the dark years after he was traded, and the crowds were so small that they often closed down that upper deck. And so, when the Mets called and asked me to join their broadcast team in 1989, I'd already had a quarter century of prep work under my belt. I've often thought about how fortunate I am that the only major league team I've ever worked for is the one I grew up following and rooting for as a kid, and I've often wondered how the experience might have been different with another team. Of course, one of the most thrilling parts about joining the Mets was the opportunity to work with Bob Murphy, whose voice had been a part of my life as long as I could remember, and it was now my partner. There was barely a day that went by for the 15 years that Murph and I worked together that I didn't have to pinch myself. And it wasn't just Murph. All of a sudden, I was surrounded by some of the greatest who had ever graced a broadcast booth. Ralph Kiner and Tim McCarver doing Mets TV, Vin Scully in LA, Jack Buck in St. Louis, Skip Carey in Atlanta. I was in awe. But every single one of those gentlemen could not have been more gracious in welcoming this unknown newcomer to their small circle. When I joined the Mets, they had just been through the best four-year stretch in franchise history. 1985, 98 wins, the World Championship in '86, one game short of the World Series in '88. So I arrived thinking I was joining a juggernaut, but not so much. My debut coincided with a reversal of fortune for the Mets that lasted 10 years, until 1999. I will always consider 1999 my favorite Mets season. The slugging of Mike Piazza, the clutch bats of John Olerud and Edgardo Alfonso and Robin Ventura, the spectacular infield defense highlighted by Ray Ordonez, the litany of comebacks right down to Game 6 against the Braves in the LCS, coming from 5 runs down only to let 2 leads get away late. That, for me, almost overshadowed 2000 when the Mets finally returned to the World Series, and maybe it's just that watching the Yankees celebrate on the field at Shea left a somewhat bitter taste. My two most special broadcast years might have been 2004 and 2005. Not great seasons for the Mets, but a real treat for me because I got to work with my brother from another mother, Howie Rose. 2 kids from Queens who grew up as Mets fans, finishing each other's sentences and sounding as though we were sharing a single brain sometimes. Now, as I think I've made pretty clear, I grew up as a radio guy. I never had any aspiration to work in television. I was all about the power of words and descriptions, painting the game on a blank palette in the mind. So when the Mets prepared to launch their own TV network, SNY, in 2006, I really didn't pay much attention. But when John Littner and Kurt Gowdy Jr. approached me, they sold me on the idea that this was a chance to be involved with a new enterprise, starting from scratch with a different idea of what a team-owned network could be. And I thought, well, if I'm ever going to go into television, now's the time. At least the subject matter will be the same. I'll just have to dress better and talk less. I knew both Keith, although he doesn't remember me, and Ron Darling before we started at SNY. Keith last year as a player was my first with the Mets, and I'd been around him a little bit while he was getting his feet wet in television. And Ronnie and I had also overlapped for a couple of years at the end of his career. But I can't tell you that I had any idea how this new grouping would pan out. What I think worked in our favor was our relative lack of experience. I had never worked in TV. Ronnie had done 1 year in Washington, and Keith had dabbled part-time. So we recognized from the start that we needed to lean on each other, and so we did. And for 13 years, things have worked out pretty well. We were very fortunate our first season brought the best Mets team of our tenure with a young David Wright and Jose Reyes, veteran stars like Carlos Beltran and Carlos Delgado. That team appeared equipped to win it all. Alas, not to be. Aside from that '06 team and the out-of-nowhere World Series run in 2015, we've witnessed plenty of lean years from the Mets. But it's during those seasons, I think, we've often had the most fun. We were endowed from the beginning with the great fortune of inheriting the finest baseball TV director who ever lived, the great Bill Webb, and his worthy successor, Dan Barr, and the smartest, most creatively innovative producer, Greg Picker. We've broken some things along the way, and sometimes we've ruffled some feathers, but with brilliant partners who can explain the game like few others, and the ability to laugh at ourselves, our hope is that our audience is informed and entertained frequently enough to keep tuning in. I have a few people I'd like to thank whose names I've not yet mentioned. I would not be standing here today if not for a guy named Gary Sparber, who was a superb sportscaster in his own right. He was my boss at WORD Radio in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Gary taught me that warmth and authenticity trumped announcing every time. The late Dave Rosenfield was my angel. Dave, you might know, was the longtime general manager of the Tidewater Tides. Dave was also a radio aficionado, and while I never worked for him, he turned me down twice. Dave steered me to minor league jobs in Durham and Pawtucket, and he smoothed my path to the Mets booth as well. Chris Majkowski has been engineering and producing Mets games on the radio for 25 years, hasn't missed a game. Madge has been a great friend and a sounding board, and he knows where all the skeletons are buried. My mom helped nurture my love of baseball. She was a Giants fan until the day Willie Mays became a Met. And when I was 11 years old in 1969, she let me stand in line all night by myself outside Shea Stadium to buy postseason tickets. 11 years old. Mom, what were you thinking? Thank you to my 5 kids for putting up with their dad being away so much during their childhood. Notable that none of them has shown even a shred of interest in this line of work. And most of all, thank you to the love of my life, my wife Lynn, who first consented to accompany me to Mets games only because those were the days when Lee Mazzilli was wearing tight pants. Not her last baseball crush, but somehow I always won out, which makes me the luckiest man in the world. Thank you again to the New York State Baseball Hall of Fame, and especially to Rennie, and thank you all very much.